Dwayne Johnson strolled through the sun-soaked streets of Long Beach, California, trying to clear his head after a grueling morning on set. Filming had been intense. He was starring in a crime thriller about a port town vigilante. And although he enjoyed the challenge of the role, the constant barrage of cameras and crew left him yearning for a little serenity. By his side trotted Diesel, a sturdy pit bull with a short brindle coat and a gentle, soulful gaze. Diesel had been rescued from a difficult past before joining the production as both an on-screen companion and an off-screen friend to Dwayne. The two made quite a pair. Dwayne, broad-shouldered and instantly recognizable to any passerby paying attention, and Diesel sporting a faint scar across his muzzle that hinted at a lifetime of hardships he was slowly overcoming. That afternoon, the breeze rolling off the Pacific brought a sense of calm to the city, rustling the palm trees along Ocean Boulevard. Cargo ships lined the horizon in the shimmering heat, waiting to dock at the busy port. Even from several blocks away, Dwayne could hear the rumble of activity, cranes lifting containers, forklifts beeping in reverse, and workers shouting instructions. But here, on the quieter side streets, life seemed less chaotic. People bustled in and out of shops with bright murals on their walls. Restaurants offered seafood specials chalked up on standing boards, and an ice cream truck rolled by with a jingly tune that made Diesel prick his ears in momentary interest. They had just wrapped a scene involving a tense stakeout at an abandoned warehouse, so the chance to slip away and wander was precisely what Dwayne needed to de-stress. When he first told the production crew he'd be taking Diesel for a walk, Noah Patterson, the film's head animal handler, had hesitated. Noah was an older gentleman with a wiry frame and a perpetual squint, like he was always evaluating every risk. "You sure you got him under control?" Noah had asked, gripping a leather leash with white knuckles. "He still gets skittish around unpredictable situations, especially men who come at him fast. We've been working on that, but you've seen how he can get." Dwayne assured Noah he'd be careful. He felt Diesel needed a break from the film set as much as he did. After seeing Diesel pacing restlessly and whining whenever a stranger approached, Dwayne decided a quiet walk might offer the dog some normalcy. Dwayne inhaled the briny air, Diesel snuffling at stray scraps of food left on the sidewalk. The dog's tail swayed side to side, a soft wag that told Dwayne that this was a welcome break indeed. He'd never thought he'd bond so closely with a dog, especially one cast in a supporting role for a movie. But Diesel's quiet loyalty and resilience had drawn him in. The production had rescued Diesel from a local shelter specifically for the film, wanting a dog with a certain tough exterior, soft heart look. Over the weeks, Dwayne recognized a bit of himself in Diesel, a fighter who'd survived adversity and still found ways to trust and care for the people around him. As the pair turned onto a narrower side street, they passed chain-link fences adorned with graffiti depicting dolphins, waves, and tributes to those who'd lost their lives at sea. Diesel sniffed at a cluster of trash cans, while Dwayne glanced at a laminated flyer taped to a street lamp. It advertised a local charity event for rescued pets, ironically reminding him of Diesel's own background. The momentary peace gave Dwayne a sense of ease, but he couldn't shake a subtle foreboding feeling. Call it actor's intuition or plain old wariness. He sensed that not every corner of Long Beach was content to remain quiet, especially if you wandered into the wrong place at the wrong time. Their walk took them to a district near the port, where older bars and dockside diners still clung to the vestiges of Long Beach's wilder days. Here, chipped paint on window frames and dim neon signs spoke of decades of rowdy patrons, maritime lore, and backroom deals. Dwayne had been cautioned by locals to watch his step around these parts after sunset. Even in broad daylight, some spots emanated an undercurrent of tension, like a coiled spring waiting to snap. A prominent fixture of this district was the Iron Anchor, a dive bar with its name scrawled in cracked, peeling letters across a fading marquee. Outside, motorcycles were lined up in a neat but intimidating row, their chrome glinting in the sun. Black leather jackets hung from handlebars, and a few tall figures wearing heavy boots smoked cigarettes nearby. It was the type of place that had a storied reputation for welcoming bikers, sailors, and rough-and-tumble souls seeking a stiff drink. As Dwayne approached, Diesel's posture changed. His ears stiffened slightly, and his steps slowed. The dog's senses were keener than any security guards. If Diesel was alert, it usually meant something warranted caution. Dwayne briefly considered crossing the street to avoid the group, but Diesel had started panting heavily. He needed water, and there was a battered metal bowl by the bar's entrance that might serve as a quick refreshment. So, deciding not to overthink it, Dwayne guided Diesel closer, his own posture relaxed but vigilant. As they neared the water bowl, a sandy-haired woman in her late 40s stepped out of the bar carrying a tray loaded with empty beer bottles. She wore a simple black apron and bore the name tag Georgia pinned to her chest. Her eyes landed on Diesel first, and a kind smile spread across her face. "Looks like somebody's thirsty," she said, her voice carrying a Midwestern lilt. Without waiting for a reply, Georgia set down the tray, retrieved a pitcher of fresh water from inside, and refilled the dog's bowl. Diesel moved forward, lapping eagerly. Dwayne nodded in appreciation. "Thank you. I owe you one. Didn't think we'd find some kindness here," he said, a hint of humor in his tone. Georgia wiped her hands on her apron, then fixed him with an amused look. "We're not all scoundrels, you know. It's just a different crowd here." Before they could exchange more words, a group of bikers on the bar's steps grew silent, their attention shifting squarely to Dwayne and Diesel. Leading this group was Clint Slater, a beefy, square-jawed figure with deep-set eyes that glinted with mischief, or perhaps hostility. The patch on his leather vest bore a stylized wolf's head, the insignia of a local biker club, rumored to be involved in everything from petty harassment to more serious crimes like smuggling and racketeering. Clint narrowed his gaze at Dwayne, sizing him up with a sneer that accentuated a faint scar across his chin. "Well, look who's wandering onto our turf," he drawled, flicking his cigarette onto the pavement with practiced disdain. One of his companions let out a low chuckle, the kind that made Diesel shift his stance in discomfort. Georgia looked from Clint back to Dwayne and offered an apologetic shrug, as if to say, "Sorry, that's just how they are." Dwayne simply met Clint's stare, neither challenging nor retreating. He'd dealt with intimidating figures on movie sets, but real-life hostility had a different kind of edge to it. "We're just passing by," Dwayne said calmly, keeping his voice even. "Didn't realize there was turf to be concerned about." Clint's lips curled in a sneer, and he took a step forward, the boards beneath his heavy boots creaking ominously. "Depends on who you ask," he muttered. One of his buddies, a lanky man with tattoos snaking up his arms, muttered something under his breath that made the others snicker. Georgia sensed the tension mounting. She positioned herself subtly between Clint and Dwayne, arms folded in a show of quiet defiance. "Cut it out, Clint," she scolded, her tone a balance of firmness and caution. "We don't need trouble today, especially not with the sheriff sniffing around lately." Clint gave her a withering look, then spat a wad of tobacco juice onto the curb. "Don't tell me what to do in my own spot," he said, but he didn't advance further, perhaps conscious of Dwayne's impressive stature. Or perhaps not in the mood for a full-blown altercation yet. Dwayne took a slow breath. He felt Diesel's tension through the leash. The dog's hackles had risen just a little, an instinctual sign of caution. Dwayne gave a gentle tug, silently telling Diesel everything was under control. He knew that if Diesel grew alarmed enough, the Pitbull's defensive instincts might kick in, and that was a scenario Dwayne wanted to avoid at all costs. "Thanks for the water," he said to Georgia, his voice steady. "We'll let you get back to work." Georgia dipped her head, relief flickering in her eyes. As Dwayne and Diesel walked away from the iron anchor, he could feel the heat of Clint Slater's gaze boring into his back. The rest of the bikers stepped aside grudgingly, and Georgia hurried inside, likely hoping the tension would dissipate once everyone had some space. Diesel kept glancing over his shoulder, as if expecting an ambush, but none came. The rhythmic rumble of the port's cranes and forklifts resumed as the pair turned down another street. Further along, Dwayne spotted a modest cafe with a shaded patio, a stark contrast to the dive bar's oppressive atmosphere. A couple of film crew members waved from a table near the entrance. Evidently, they'd found the cafe for lunch. They beckoned him over, but he shook his head politely. He wanted some time alone with Diesel, especially after that unsettling encounter. Instead, he continued on until he found a small bench near the waterfront. Sunlight glimmered on the waves and seagulls danced overhead, squawking over scraps of food. The bench was a perfect spot for Diesel to rest and for Dwayne to gather his thoughts. He pulled out his phone to check messages. A missed call from Noah Patterson, presumably wondering when Diesel would return to set. A text from the director, reminding everyone about an afternoon shot that needed to start promptly at 2. And a few missed calls from a friend in Los Angeles. Probably unimportant, but it added to the sense of urgency creeping into his day. Diesel stretched out on the warm boards of the pier, letting out a low, contented groan. Dwayne crouched next to him, rubbing the dog's ears. "We good here, buddy?" he murmured, scanning Diesel for signs of distress. Diesel responded with a slow wag of the tail. Good, Dwayne thought. The dog seemed okay for now, yet the memory of Clint Slater's sneer and the vibe of those bikers haunted Dwayne. He might be used to playing tough roles in movies, heroes unafraid to stand up to criminals and bullies, but real-world men like Clint seldom adhered to a script. They did what they wanted, when they wanted, and often got away with it. Dwayne couldn't help but worry that Diesel, with his past trauma, might become a target if the dog displayed any form of aggression. The Pitbull had come a long way in training and therapy, but unpredictability was in the air. After a few more minutes of soaking in the sun, Dwayne decided it was time to return Diesel to the set. The second round of filming would start soon, and he didn't want to keep the crew waiting. He guided Diesel up a flight of steps leading away from the water's edge, back toward the makeshift parking lot where crew members had parked vans and trailers. Noah Patterson was there, pacing in front of a weathered trailer and fiddling with his phone. The moment he spotted Dwayne and Diesel, relief flashed across his face, quickly replaced by concern. "Everything okay? You two were gone a while," Noah said, greeting Diesel with a cautious pat on the head. Diesel wagged his tail in acknowledgement, but the dog's earlier tension still lingered under his furs like a static charge. "We had a run-in with some local bikers," Dwayne explained quietly, kneeling to unclip Diesel's leash. "They didn't do anything direct to us, just gave off a nasty vibe." Noah's brow furrowed. "Clint Slater, was it?" When Dwayne nodded, Noah let out a low whistle. "I've heard that name. Some folks say he's into a lot more than just a rough, rowdy lifestyle. Something about stolen shipments, intimidation tactics. Who knows?" He paused, lowering his voice. "Better watch yourself and watch Diesel. Guys like that enjoy picking fights with the biggest target in the room." Dwayne's jaw tightened, a flicker of protectiveness surfacing in his dark eyes. "Trust me, I'm aware. Let's just hope we don't cross paths again." Despite trying to brush it off, Dwayne found it difficult to focus entirely on filming that afternoon. The scene they were shooting involved his character confronting a corrupt city official, a moment brimming with moral tension that Dwayne usually performed with ease. But each time the director called action, and he gazed into the camera, a part of his mind drifted back to the Iron Anchor, picturing Clint Slater's sneer and hearing that ominous, "Well, look who's wandering onto our turf." Diesel, too, seemed out of sorts. During takes, he followed cues on set, but would occasionally glance over his shoulder or perk his ears at sudden noises, as though anticipating another confrontation. This skittishness drew the concern of the crew, particularly the cinematographer who needed Diesel to hit certain marks for the camera angles to work. The dog tried his best, but his tension made his usual cooperative energy waver, leading to more retakes than normal. Between scenes, Dwayne knelt to soothe Diesel. "Hey, buddy," he said softly, petting the pit bull's flank. "It's all right. We're safe here." Diesel's gaze flicked around, and his tail wagged in slow, uneven beats, indicating he was trying to believe Dwayne's reassurance, but still felt uneasy. Noah offered Dwayne a small bag of treats. "Try giving him one if he nails his mark," he suggested. "Positive reinforcement goes a long way." Nodding, Dwayne accepted the treats, hoping to counter Diesel's nerves with some well-earned rewards. The sun began to sink toward the horizon, casting elongated shadows across the set. When the director finally wrapped the day, Dwayne felt a wave of exhaustion, both physical and emotional. He looked at Diesel, whose drooping eyelids suggested he was equally drained. "Let's get you some proper rest," Dwayne whispered, lightly scratching Diesel's chin. The dog made a soft whine as though agreeing wholeheartedly, yet a persistent knot of anxiety refused to unravel from Dwayne's gut. Intuition told him that the tension he'd experienced earlier was more than just a passing glare. The next day dawned warm and bright, sunlight spilling through the windows of the small bungalow Dwayne had rented for the duration of filming. Located a few blocks from the beach, it was a cozy setup. Nothing extravagant, just enough space for him and Diesel to be comfortable. He woke early, took Diesel for a short walk, and then got ready to head back to set. As he prepped coffee in the bungalow's compact kitchen, he couldn't shake the memory of Clint Slater, that gnawing feeling that something dangerous remained unresolved. Arriving on set, Dwayne was greeted by the usual bustle: makeup artists hauling cases of brushes and prosthetics, costume designers fussing over last-minute fixes, and production assistants hustling to keep everything on schedule. Diesel ambled beside him, tail wagging a bit more confidently today, as though the day's fresh start had eased some of his previous tension. Noah Patterson gave Dwayne a quick rundown of the day's filming plan: a chase sequence through a shipping yard, culminating in a tense standoff near one of the massive cargo ships. Diesel would appear in a few frames, mostly as a loyal sidekick, carefully navigating crates and scaffolding. Mid-morning found them deep into the chase scene, with Dwayne sprinting after a stuntman playing a criminal. Diesel followed close, expertly trained to run just behind Dwayne. The cameras rolled from multiple angles, capturing the dramatic pursuit amid crates, forklifts, and flapping tarps. The ocean breeze whipped across the set, giving everything a high-stakes immediacy. For a while, Dwayne and Diesel forgot about everything except the exhilaration of doing their jobs. The director, perched on a scaffold with a megaphone, called out instructions. "Go faster, Dwayne! Diesel, keep pace! Perfect! Hold it! Cut!" They repeated the sequence multiple times, each run leaving Dwayne a bit more winded. But Diesel seemed invigorated. The dog's mouth hung open in a big Pitbull grin, tongue lolling as though to say, "That was fun! Let's do it again!" After one successful take, Dwayne showered him with praise and a treat, prompting Diesel to wiggle happily. Noah watched them, arms folded, clearly pleased. "You two are becoming quite the duo," he remarked. "Might have to put you guys in more scenes together." Shortly past noon, the scene wrapped, and everyone dispersed for lunch. Dwayne, feeling the need for some fresh air, decided he'd step off the set for a bit. Diesel seemed content to nap in a shaded area, so Dwayne left him with Noah, who kept a fresh bowl of water and a comfortable spot for the dog to rest. Dwayne took a stroll along the waterfront, letting the wind cool the sweat on his temples. He briefly considered visiting that cafe from the day before, but opted for a different spot, hoping to avoid any potential run-ins with the Iron Anchor crowd. Still, as he walked, his gaze flitted around, scanning corners and side streets in unconscious vigilance. After grabbing a quick sandwich from a tiny shop that smelled of grilled onions and fresh bread, he found himself drifting back toward the set's perimeter. A figure stepped from behind a cargo container, a tall, wiry man with a patch on his vest, featuring the same snarling wolf insignia worn by Clint Slater. The man's features twisted into a smirk, and he gave Dwayne a mocking little wave. Tension flooded Dwayne's veins. He managed a nod, forcing himself not to break stride, but a flicker of dread sparked behind his eyes. Clearly, Clint Slater's presence, or at least his influence, had begun to seep into the edges of Dwayne's world. Word traveled fast in a place like Long Beach, especially around the ports where rumor and fact intermingled with an ease that made them almost indistinguishable. By late afternoon, Dwayne heard scraps of chatter from various crew members, rumors of biker trouble near the set, stories about a string of thefts from a container yard, and even talk that the local sheriff had been looking into certain bars along the waterfront, suspecting them as hubs for illegal activity. The name Clint Slater cropped up more than once in hushed tones. While many on the crew shrugged it off as local color, Dwayne took each piece of gossip to heart. He found himself pulling Noah aside between takes. "If you see any suspicious types hanging around Diesel, let me know immediately," Dwayne urged. Noah's brows knitted together, a flicker of concern darkening his typically calm features. "You think they'd actually target a dog just to antagonize you?" he asked, genuinely puzzled. "There's all kinds of ways scumbags might strike," Dwayne replied, grimly recalling Diesel's uneasy manner the day before. "It's not out of the question." The filming that day concluded without incident, culminating in a wrap that drew applause from the tired but satisfied crew. As they packed up, Dwayne lingered on set to ensure Diesel remained safe. The dog stood near a van loaded with gear, quietly observing everyone around him. Now and then, a crew member approached to pat Diesel's head or offer him a treat. Diesel accepted these gestures with polite interest. Noah gave Dwayne a ride back to his rented bungalow. On the drive, they discussed scheduling for the next few days, but the conversation inevitably circled back to the run-in with Clint Slater. "I can't imagine how someone like that would have a vested interest in you specifically," Noah mused aloud, "unless he wants to prove something." Dwayne just exhaled a weary sigh. Bullies love big targets. That evening, Dwayne tried to unwind by flicking on the TV and tuning into a baseball game. Diesel sprawled across the couch beside him, head resting on Dwayne's thigh. Yet restfulness eluded him. Every clang from the street outside made him jumpy. He found himself peeking out the window at intervals, half expecting to see bikes idling at the curb. Diesel, too, occasionally raised his head, ears perked as if feeding off Dwayne's tension. Around midnight, when the game ended, Dwayne finally decided he had to quell his paranoia. He double-checked the locks on the doors, drew the curtains closed, and tried to settle back on the couch with a book about historical maritime crimes. An ironic choice, but it was the only reading material he had at hand. Diesel nudged him gently, as though sensing Dwayne's unease. The next day dawned, and with it came a text from an unknown number. "Stay in your lane." Dwayne's gut tightened. The area code was local, and the message, though short, dripped with warning. He showed it to Noah, who swore under his breath. They mulled over whether to bring it to the authorities, but with zero proof it was linked to Slater, they weren't sure how to proceed. The day's filming progressed in a subdued atmosphere, overshadowed by Dwayne's growing certainty that a storm was brewing. Diesel performed well in his scenes, but any time a stranger came within a few feet, the dogs stiffened. Mid-afternoon, as they broke for lunch, Dwayne decided to do something normal. Grab a meal at a well-reviewed dockside eatery he'd heard about from the makeup crew. Maybe routine normalcy would cut through the anxiety. He planned to bring Diesel with him, believing the dog would appreciate some fresh air and exercise. Sure, he felt anxious about potential run-ins, but Diesel's presence always provided a sense of comfort. The dockside eatery was a charming spot situated near a modest marina, where small fishing boats bobbed in the gentle waves. Called the Harbor House, its welcoming exterior displayed nautical decor, life preservers, ship's wheels, and even a few fishing nets. An overhanging awning offered shade to patrons dining outdoors, while inside, bright red stools lined a counter before a busy open kitchen. As Dwayne arrived with Diesel, a friendly hostess named Rita greeted them. She recognized Dwayne from the local headlines about his film. "We're huge fans," she admitted, guiding him to a corner table on the patio. Diesel sat calmly, his sturdy body curling near Dwayne's feet. Sipping on cold iced tea, Dwayne felt a momentary sense of peace again. The clink of silverware, the low hum of customers chatting, and the mild sea breeze formed a tranquil setting he hoped would hold. Partway through his grilled fish sandwich, though, the atmosphere shifted. Three bikers strolled up to the Harbor House's patio, scanning the diners. One of them, a tall man wearing reflective sunglasses, rested his hand on the back of a chair at a nearby table. He didn't immediately acknowledge Dwayne, but the tension in the air implied that they were fully aware of him. Diesel lifted his head, ears perked, and let out a quiet whine. Rita approached the trio, her polite smile faltering when she noticed their expressions. "Welcome," she said, gesturing to the open seating. But one of the bikers shook his head, eyes locked on Diesel. "No dogs allowed, right?" he asked, voice dripping with challenge. Rita's gaze flicked nervously to Dwayne. "We allow service animals," she explained. "And, Mr. Johnson here, he's—" She trailed off, not wanting to provoke them. The man didn't wait for her to finish. Sure, he said, still glaring at Diesel. He then smirked and looked back at his buddies. "Let's just grab a few beers and chill. We're not here to cause trouble." Despite that statement, his tone carried a sneering undercurrent. They sat at a table not far from Dwayne's, ordering beers and continuing to watch him with studied indifference. Diesel refused to settle, eyes darting from one man to the next. Eventually, Rita brought their beers, carefully avoiding eye contact. The men clinked glasses and made pointed remarks, letting out occasional bursts of laughter that, to Dwayne's ears, sounded artificially loud, like they were performing for an audience. He tried to ignore them, focusing on finishing his sandwich. Diesel, still uneasy, whined again. Dwayne set a calming hand on the dog's back. "We're gonna go soon," he whispered to Diesel, glancing at the dog's half-empty water bowl. He wondered if slipping out quietly was the best move, or if it might embolden them to follow. Just as he signaled for the check, one of the men abruptly stood. He meandered over to Dwayne's table, leaning in with a smirk. Dwayne tensed, muscles coiling. "Hey, big shot," the man said. "Heard you've been poking around the neighborhood, making waves." Dwayne offered a tight smile. "Just here filming, that's all." Diesel's tail went rigid, and the dog let out a low growl. The man paid no mind, hooking a thumb under his belt. "Filming," he repeated sarcastically, shooting a glance back at his pals. "Clint Slater sends his regards." Dwayne felt the chill of recognition course through his veins at the mention of Clint Slater. This, then, was no accidental encounter. The man sauntered back to his table, apparently satisfied with having delivered whatever message he'd been sent to convey. Diesel's growl subsided, but the dog's body remained taut as a bowstring, eyes fixated on the small group. Dwayne could feel his pulse pounding in his ears. He signaled Rita for the check, paid hastily, and guided Diesel away from the patio. The bikers chuckled behind him. One of them raised his beer in a mocking toast. Walking briskly back toward the set, Dwayne cursed under his breath for letting them get under his skin. Diesel matched his pace, clearly sensing Dwayne's tension. He was grateful the men hadn't tried to provoke a physical altercation, but the ominous mention of Clint Slater meant lines were being drawn. The unspoken threat was becoming more explicit by the hour. When Dwayne arrived at the production area, Noah picked up on his agitation right away. He listened intently as Dwayne recounted what had happened at the Harbor House. "It's definitely Slater," Dwayne muttered. "He's got his guys tailing me. Could be that they want me rattled, or maybe they're looking for a bigger reason to strike." Noah nodded slowly, a crease forming between his brows. "You should tell the sheriff. Even if they can't do much without a direct crime, it's good to have it on record." Dwayne hesitated, recalling the text message and the repeated run-ins. "You're right," he finally said. Later that evening, after Diesel was safely in the bungalow, Dwayne placed a call to Sheriff Wayne Edwards, the local lawman with a reputation for no-nonsense policing. The sheriff listened carefully, occasionally asking clarifying questions. "Slater's been on our radar for a while," Sheriff Edwards explained. "Nothing's stuck yet, but we know he's at the center of some smuggling operations, plus a string of smaller charges, vandalism, extortion, that sort of thing." Dwayne outlined his encounters, from the moment Diesel drank from the Iron Anchor's bowl to the messages and taunting in public spaces. "I don't want trouble," he stressed, "but I've got a feeling they're not going to let this go." Sheriff Edward exhaled a long breath. "I'll have my deputies keep an eye out, and if you see anything more direct, call immediately." The following days passed in a strange stalemate. Filming continued, with Dwayne and Diesel completing scenes without major hitches. Occasionally, an unidentifiable biker or two would appear at the periphery of the set's location, just watching, sometimes taking pictures, sometimes just smirking. Tension coiled among the crew as rumors spread about potential sabotage. A few production members joked about how it might help the film's gritty realism, but behind the humor lay real unease. Despite the undercurrent of threat, Diesel began to show signs of returning to his more playful demeanor. During breaks, he'd pounce at tennis balls tossed by the camera crew or roll onto his back for belly rubs from the makeup artist who had a soft spot for animals. Dwayne clung to those small moments as pockets of hope, believing that if they kept calm and vigilant, maybe the bikers would lose interest. Perhaps Clint Slater was content just to intimidate rather than escalate. But that illusion shattered one afternoon when Dwayne took Diesel for a midday walk along the waterfront, away from the main cluster of the film crew. The sun sparkled off the water as Dwayne and Diesel meandered along the marina. Fishing boats pulled into their slips, deckhands securing ropes and unloading crates of fresh catch. A few casual sightseers snapped photos of the harbor, while gulls circled overhead, waiting for scraps. It was an idyllic scene, making it easy to temporarily forget the tension that lurked elsewhere. Diesel sniffed at scattered seaweed on the pier, his tail wagging in slow, curious arcs. Dwayne felt himself relax, lulled by the tang of salt air, in the methodical lullaby of waves against wood. He didn't see Clint Slater until he was practically upon them. The man stepped around from behind a stack of cargo crates, hands buried in his pockets. Two cronies flanked him, a squat, broad-shouldered man with a shaved head, and a taller figure who wore a bandana featuring that ominous wolf insignia. Diesel's ears went rigid, a faint growl rattling in his throat. Dwayne halted, instincts on high alert. Slater eyed Diesel with open contempt, then shifted his gaze to Dwayne. "Enjoying the sights?" he asked with a slow, menacing drawl. Dwayne's pulse quickened, but he refused to show fear. "Long Beach is beautiful," he said flatly, keeping Diesel close by his side. "Something I can help you with?" Clint Slater pretended to ponder the question, tilting his head as if weighing his next words. "Help me?" "Doubtful," he finally said, a sneer tugging at one corner of his mouth. "From what I hear, you've been chatty with the sheriff." Diesel let out another growl, but Dwayne gently hushed him. One of Slater's cronies took a step forward, tapping a thick chain coiled around his waist like a belt. The sound of metal links rattling caused Diesel to inch closer to Dwayne. Slater raised a hand to stall his companion, adopting a mocking tone. "Easy, Wade. Let's not scare the movie star more than we have to." Dwayne's heart thundered, but he forced himself to stand tall. "I'm not looking for any trouble, Slater," he said, voice taut. "But if you harm me or my dog, you'd better believe the police will be on you in a heartbeat." Slater's laughter erupted, raw and mirthless. "You think that scares me? The cops have been trying to nail me for years. I'm still here." Diesel, sensing the hostility, tensed even further, letting out a bark that echoed across the marina. Slater's cronies recoiled slightly, but Slater took it as a challenge. "Shut that mutt up," he hissed, taking a menacing step forward. In a flash, he swung a boot at Diesel's hindquarters. Dwayne reacted instantly, yanking Diesel's leash to pull him away. The blow landed glancingly, but Diesel yelped in pain and scrambled to regain his balance, nearly dragging Dwayne off his feet. Fury ignited in Dwayne's chest. He felt his protective instincts flare as he positioned himself between Diesel and Slater, fists clenched. "Don't you dare," he growled, voice shaking with barely contained rage. Slater locked eyes with him, an eerie grin twisting his features. "What are you going to do about it?" The threat hung in the air. One of Slater's accomplices spat on the ground, while the other cracked his knuckles, as though bracing for a brawl. For a tense few seconds, Dwayne wrestled with the urge to lash out. The rational part of his mind held him back. Three men, obviously itching for violence, had him outnumbered. Diesel was already trembling from that half-landed kick. If a full-blown fight erupted, Diesel could be severely hurt. With an effort, Dwayne forced himself to speak calmly, though it took everything in him to keep his voice level. "You've already committed assault," he said in an even tone, never breaking eye contact with Slater. "Lay another hand on my dog, or me, and you'll have more than the sheriff to worry about." Slater studied Dwayne for a moment, apparently weighing how far he wanted to take things. Finally, he chuckled, turning as though he was about to leave. But before stepping away, he spoke over his shoulder in a low snarl. "Watch your back, hero. Next time I won't go easy." His two followers smirked, casting triumphant glares at Dwayne and Diesel, then trailed after Slater. Their heavy boots thumped against the wooden pier, receding until they disappeared behind the cargo crates. Dwayne stood there, chest rising and falling with rapid breaths. Diesel leaned into him, trembling slightly, and Dwayne felt the adrenaline surging in his veins. He exhaled slowly, coaxing Diesel into a quieter state. "We're okay," he murmured, though he wasn't entirely sure he believed it. The jarring image of Slater's twisted grin burned in his memory. It took a few minutes for Dwayne to compose himself enough to walk away. He crouched to check Diesel for injuries, rubbing gently at the dog's haunches. The pit bull whimpered, but seemed physically unharmed aside from bruising. The psychological toll, however, was evident in Diesel's jittery stance and the anxious way he kept glancing back. "Come on," Dwayne said softly, leading Diesel back toward the film set. "Let's go talk to the sheriff." He dialed Sheriff Edwards en route, explaining what had transpired. This time his voice shook with anger. "That's assault on me, And definitely on Diesel, he said, heart pounding. On the other end, Sheriff Edwards' tone turned grim. I'll file a formal report, the sheriff said. We can't just sit on this. Bring your dog to the clinic if needed, get him checked out, and I'll see if we can track Slater's movements. Don't go after him alone. The more Dwayne recounted the story, the more the significance of the assault sank in. Slater had done more than just intimidate. He'd actively harmed Diesel. No matter how much Dwayne wanted to keep the peace, it was clear that Slater was pushing for conflict. And if a standoff was inevitable, Dwayne would not stand idly by while Diesel was put in danger again. That night, sleep escaped him entirely. He lay awake on the couch, Diesel curled up next to him with soft whimpers punctuating the silence. Moonlight spilled through the curtains, illuminating the dog's bruise as a faint shadow on his fur. Each time Dwayne's eyelids grew heavy, visions of Slater's sneer jolted him awake. He felt the old question gnawing at him. How far was he willing to go to protect Diesel? He'd faced fictional villains on screen countless times, but real-life criminals with unpredictable agendas were another matter. A glimmer of hope arrived the next morning when Dwayne took Diesel to Dr. Sheridan, a compassionate veterinarian known in the area for treating abused or traumatized animals. Dr. Sheridan performed a thorough exam and concluded that Diesel's bruising was superficial and would heal with time and rest. More concerning was the dog's spike in stress-related behaviors. He's showing signs of heightened anxiety, Dr. Sheridan explained, gently stroking Diesel's head. I'll prescribe something mild to help keep him calm, but ultimately, it's going to depend on whether he feels safe in his environment. Dwayne nodded, swallowing the guilt that crept in. He had walked Diesel into danger after all. He hadn't anticipated Slater's willingness to hurt the dog so directly. But the fact remained that Diesel had been exposed to a violent moment. After picking up the medication and thanking Dr. Sheridan, Dwayne returned Diesel to Noah on set, instructing everyone to keep a close eye on the Pitbull. If you see anyone suspicious hanging around, he told the crew, call me or the sheriff, no hesitation. By midday, a potential turning point arrived. Sheriff Edwards contacted Dwayne with an update. We've had eyes on the Iron Anchor, the sheriff said. Slater's been laying low since last night, but we suspect bigger crimes are tied to that bar. Trafficking, extortion rackets, you name it. We're building a case. Your statement about Diesel helps. If we can pin assault and animal cruelty charges on him, plus find evidence of organized crimes, we might finally bring him down for good. The gravity in Sheriff Edwards' voice spoke volumes. Slater's downfall depended not just on official investigations, but on Dwayne's willingness to stand as a witness. The pressure bore down on Dwayne. He hadn't signed up to be a vigilante or an informant. He was simply an actor who'd hoped for a peaceful filming schedule, but Diesel's frightened whimpers echoed in his mind, fueling a sense of responsibility. Anything I can do to help, I will, he promised the sheriff, though uncertainty gnawed at him. He knew that testifying against a man like Slater meant painting a target on himself and on Diesel. That evening, after a long day of filming, Dwayne retreated to his bungalow. Diesel seemed calmer, curled up on a soft bed that a thoughtful crew member had donated. Dwayne sifted through takeout menus, too drained to cook. While trying to choose between Chinese or pizza, a short text lit up his phone. You and that dog are dead meat. The blood drained from Dwayne's face. The area code matched the one from the stay in your lane message. He dropped into a kitchen chair, inhaling shallowly. Diesel, tuned to his owner's moods, roused and patted over, pressing his nose against Dwayne's leg. I'm sorry, boy, Dwayne whispered, stroking Diesel's head. This is spiraling. But they were already in too deep. He couldn't ignore the threat, not after Slater's physical assault and repeated harassment. Slowly, he typed out a response to Sheriff Edwards, relaying the new text. The sheriff's reply was terse. We'll intensify patrols. Don't engage. 2 days later, the tension in Long Beach's waterfront district had escalated to a fever pitch. Whispers circulated about the police planning a substantial raid on the Iron Anchor or other biker hangouts rumored to host contraband. Sheriff Edwards kept Dwayne loosely informed. We're closing in, was the common refrain, yet Slater was nowhere to be found. Some folks claimed he'd skipped town. Others insisted he was still skulking around the docks, waiting for the right moment to strike back at anyone who dared cross him. On set, Diesel's scenes wrapped sooner than expected. The director decided to restructure the final sequences, focusing on a dramatic rooftop confrontation, which didn't require Diesel's presence. Dwayne considered sending the Pitbull back to Los Angeles with Noah for safekeeping, but something in him resisted. Diesel was part of this film's heart and soul, and part of Dwayne's now too. He felt responsible for the dog in every sense, and worried that if Diesel traveled without him, Slater's people might intercept. Perhaps it was paranoid, but paranoia seemed justified these days. The production crew's morale dipped as talk of biker threats circulated. Dwayne did his best to keep them motivated, signing autographs, delivering pep talks, and occasionally sharing behind-the-scenes jokes. But late one afternoon, as the final scenes of the day were shot, an urgent call crackled over the crew's radios. A scuffle near the trailers. Dwayne sprinted over, heart pounding, to find Diesel pinned against the side of a trailer by a tall, wiry biker wearing the wolf head patch. The man's face was contorted with twisted glee as he waved a link of suspicious-looking sausages before Diesel's muzzle. The dog cowered, whining, ears flat. Crew members shouted warnings, afraid to escalate. Dwayne roared, "Get away from him!" and charged. The biker smirked, dropped the sausages on the ground, and kicked them toward Diesel with venomous intent. Then he bolted, weaving through the labyrinth of set equipment. Dwayne dashed after him, only to lose him in the chaos of half-assembled stage backdrops. Noah picked up the sausages, eyes wide with horror. "They smell weird," he muttered, face blanching. "Like chemicals." Instantly, Dwayne recalled the possibility of poison. Though Diesel hadn't eaten anything, the shock of the incident sent the dog into trembling fits. Dwayne knelt, calling softly to Diesel, coaxing him to come forward. The pit bull, frantic, cowered behind a crate. After several tense moments, Diesel inched into Dwayne's arms. Rage, relief, and fear warred in Dwayne's chest. This was no idle threat. Slater's gang had grown bolder, creeping directly onto the film set. The outraged crew stared, some muttering about hiring private security, others shouting that the cops needed to shut the bikers down immediately. That night, Dwayne made a final call to Sheriff Edwards, voice shaking with suppressed fury. "They tried to poison Diesel on set," he ground out. "We have the tainted sausages. I'll hand them over to you or any officer who wants them." The sheriff sounded equally grim. "That's the last straw," Edwards said, his tone resolute. "We're launching a raid on the Iron Anchor tonight. I'm mobilizing everyone available. If Slater's there, we're taking him down." Word spread like wildfire among the crew that a police raid was imminent, and hope mingled with tension. Dwayne took Diesel back to the bungalow, ensuring the dog was safely inside before driving to the station with the evidence. He parked discreetly behind the sheriff's office, carrying a sealed plastic bag containing the sausages. Sheriff Wayne Edwards greeted him, wearing a bulletproof vest and a grim expression. "You ready?" the sheriff asked. Dwayne inhaled, nodding. "Anything I can do?" In truth, a part of him wanted to stand on the sidelines, but another part wanted to witness Slater face the consequences. Sheriff Edwards shook his head. "We've got this. Just hold tight. If we need a witness, we'll call. Our plan is to corner them before they know what's happening." The raid commenced at twilight. Nearly a dozen squad cars, their lights doused, rolled silently toward the Iron Anchor. Officers in tactical gear positioned themselves at every entry and exit point, black silhouettes in the fading dusk. On an unspoken signal, they burst through the doors. Shouts of "Police! Get down!" clashed with the heavy metal music blasting inside. Over the next few minutes, chaos erupted. Bikers yelling, glass bottles smashing, fists flying as a handful tried to resist. The police responded with overwhelming force, subduing suspects, confiscating illegal goods, and scouring the premises for contraband. Throughout it all, Slater's presence loomed. According to the radio chatter crackling through the sheriff's earpiece, he was holed up in a back room, armed and barricaded. Officers systematically closed in, corralling him against a locked storeroom. A standoff ensued, Slater shouting obscenities and firing a single warning shot into the ceiling. But cornered and outnumbered, he finally surrendered. With a venomous glare, he was cuffed and hauled outside, where flashing red and blue lights illuminated his enraged face. Once Slater was in custody, the deputies uncovered a trove of evidence. Stashes of drugs, piles of suspicious cargo manifest papers, and, chillingly, additional links of what appeared to be spiked sausages matching the ones found near Diesel. It was enough to cement animal cruelty charges and more. The police loaded Slater and his cronies into their vehicles. The night air buzzed with triumphant electricity. Onlookers, from the bar's scattered patrons to curious neighbors, awakened by the commotion, watched the spectacle of a criminal empire's downfall. After the raid, the sheriff called Dwayne, who was back at his bungalow, pacing the floor while Diesel dozed fitfully. "We got him," Edwards said, relief resonating in his voice. "He had everything. The poison, stolen goods, even an unlicensed firearm. Between your statements and this evidence, the prosecutor's going to bury him." Dwayne slumped against a wall, exhaling. "Thank you, Sheriff. I can't tell you how relieved I am to hear that." The sheriff offered a muted laugh. "Thank your dog, too. He's the reason we got the break we needed." Hanging up, Dwayne gazed at Diesel, who stirred and blinked up at him with curious eyes. "We did it, boy," Dwayne whispered. "He's done." In the days that followed, the news spread that Clint Slater's biker ring had been dismantled. Local headlines hailed the police raid, featuring quotes from Sheriff Edwards about the break in the case courtesy of a Pitbull's near poisoning. The charges piled up for Slater: assault, animal cruelty, weapons violations, probable ties to smuggling operations. It looked like he wouldn't see freedom for a very, very long time. By the time the film's final weeks of production wrapped, a sense of calm had returned to Long Beach. The Iron Anchor was shuttered, awaiting legal proceedings, its windows boarded up, and a closed until further notice sign tacked to the door. Dwayne went on with his work, filming the last scenes of the crime thriller along the waterfront, but an undeniable weight had lifted from the entire crew. Diesel, too, exhibited newfound relaxation. Freed from the looming shadow of danger, the Pitbull playfully chased drifting seagull feathers and wagged his tail more enthusiastically whenever a cast member came by with treats or praise. One sunny afternoon, Dwayne revisited Dr. Sheridan's clinic for a follow-up check on Diesel. The vet greeted the dog with a smile, praising his improved demeanor. "Looks like he's recovering from both the physical and emotional trauma," Dr. Sheridan noted, lightly examining Diesel's bruised flank. "No sign of lingering pain, and his anxiety levels are much lower. Whatever you're doing, keep it up." Dwayne nodded, feeling a rush of gratitude that Diesel had pulled through all the turmoil. "We'll take it one day at a time," he said. "But he's strong, stronger than I realized at first." That evening, after a smooth day on set, Dwayne took Diesel for a walk along the marina once more. The sun's fading light painted the sky in vibrant shades of orange and pink, reflecting on the gently rippling water. Fishermen packed up their gear, and a few tourists strolled the boardwalk, snapping pictures of the colorful horizon. Diesel sniffed the boards underfoot, occasionally pausing to watch gulls swoop overhead. Dwayne felt a reflective calm, remembering the fear that had gripped him just days ago when Slater threatened them here. Now the spot seemed reclaimed, peaceful rather than ominous. Diesel's wagging tail affirmed that dogs, at least, were adept at living in the moment once the threat had passed. Before heading back, Dwayne noticed a slip of paper wedged into the guardrail along the pier. He pulled it out, reading the scrawled text. "Thank you for standing up to bullies. This city needs people who care." There was no signature, just a simple heart doodle. He glanced around, but no one nearby showed any sign of having left it. A wave of appreciation and humility swept over him. He tucked the note into his jacket pocket, feeling as though it echoed the best parts of what he'd endured, the affirmation that good could triumph if people were brave enough to confront the darkness. On his final night in Long Beach, Dwayne packed his bags, preparing to head back to Los Angeles. Diesel sensed the change in routine, sniffing the suitcases with curiosity. Outside, the hum of traffic and the rustling of palm trees formed a soundtrack to the city's nighttime rhythms. Dwayne caught himself smiling, remembering how he initially saw Long Beach as merely a film backdrop. Now he recognized that it had given him more than just a location to act. It had challenged him, tested his commitment to protecting those he cared about, and reaffirmed that fighting for what's right could yield real, tangible change.